Do you know what phrase I really hate? It's whenever someone says that a game, quote, really makes you feel like the main character. I'm sure you've heard it before. Oh, the new Robocop game where you indiscriminately blast legions of crims with your overpowered pistol? Yeah, it really makes you feel like Robocop, doesn't it? You know Echoes of Wisdom? Wow, it sure does make you feel just as wise as Princess Zelda herself, doesn't it? Or what about the surprisingly excellent Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? You can't talk about that game on the internet for more than 5 minutes without someone, somewhere, trying to tell you that it makes you feel like Indiana Jones. And that's only mentioning games from last year. Ish. This, as an annoying habit that the gaming community seems to have, has been going on for literally years now, probably more than a decade. For some reason, both professional game reviewers and regular gaming peasants feel compelled to describe games by telling us that they make you feel like their main character. And in case you couldn't tell, this really annoys me, even though I've probably done it myself a few times. See, I find this phrase irritating not just because it's an overused way of describing a game, not simply because it's a vague, unhelpful observation for people who aren't already familiar with the game or character in question, and not even because some of the most exhausting people on the internet think that endlessly quoting an ancient Donkey video that highlights this same quirk is a really clever way of showcasing just how original they are. No, I hate the phrase, "it really makes you feel like," and all of its similar derivatives, because it simply isn't true. Think about it, right? For all these character-centric games that we enjoy that focus on portraying an individual that is distinct from the player, how many of them actually make you feel like you are the main character? Look at, in many ways, the archetypal example of these kinds of games, the Batman Arkham series. It is a meme in of itself that people say these games make you feel like Batman, but the Arkham series in particular goes out of its way to showcase the fact that Bruce Wayne is an emotionally traumatized shell of a man, driven by nothing but his regrets and his own fear of failure. I don't know about you, but that's not exactly in line with the feeling we get when playing, which is that iconic sensation of power and control that we've come to associate with the series. Equally, look at Doom, another game that people say makes you feel like the main character. The Doom Marine, particularly in the newer games, is characterized as a cold, single-minded instrument of demon death. He doesn't feel that great adrenaline rush when you score a last-second glory kill or blast a cacodemon into a million pieces from the inside out. He doesn't really care that much. The only thing that Doom Guy is capable of feeling is anger that all the demons aren't dead yet. He's incapable of experiencing anything else, something that is very well established in all the cutscenes. And yet, that doesn't stop us from saying that these games make us feel like the Doom Marine, even when they obviously don't. So, what's happening here? And why am I being weirdly pedantic about this innocuous turn of phrase? Well, first of all, if you watch this channel and aren't expecting linguistic pedantry, then you've clearly not been paying attention, but in a greater sense, I find "it makes you feel like" as a phrase particularly noteworthy because while it's clearly inaccurate, I don't think it's entirely nonsense. There is something hard to articulate but very gratifying about stepping into the shoes of a particular character, of getting to interact with the gaming world not as a faceless avatar for ourselves, but as an actual person with their own perspective and identity. And so while we might be using a really dumb name for it, we as a community have identified a kind of nascent genre that is kind of hard to articulate. Far from being a collective delusion, games that make you feel like, or what I'm going to be calling character-centric games from now on, are a very real phenomenon. And in order to explain why we are incapable of properly identifying them, I'll also need to explain how they work. See, in almost any other medium, the relationship between us as the audience and a story's perspective character is pretty simple. A particular character, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or Jura 8 in 12 Angry Men, serves as our window into the narrative, and we experience the primary conflict, learn about the world, and calibrate our reaction to things largely through them. Now, a story can of course have multiple perspective characters, or might not even have one at all, with each potential point of view providing a different lens through which we can experience the story. But what matters is that the more we as an audience are able to understand a character's perspective, and the better able we are to see the world through their eyes, the more vividly we can experience the story. A character we don't understand and don't empathize with means that they can't enrich our relationship to the narrative, but one that we feel a strong connection with can spice up even the most straightforward of stories, as their perspective adds a whole new dimension to what's going on. You know when Indiana Jones shoots that guy with the sword in Raiders of the Lost Ark? It's a great moment, not just because it's funny, but because we get Indy's exasperation at all the pointless showmanship and can empathize with both his desire to get on with the adventure already and real-life Harrison Ford's need to have a poo. TLDR, by understanding the character's point of view, the story as a whole is augmented. Unfortunately, that brings us onto video games, which are a very different beast indeed. While games often obey the same narrative structure as any other medium, we as players are a massive complicating factor because we're part of the story as well. We simultaneously occupy both the role of the audience, like in any other medium, but also as a sort of co-storyteller, as we make decisions, interact with systems, and drive the plot forwards, meaning we end up having just as much influence over the narrative's focal character as the people who actually made the game and who actually wrote the story. As you might imagine, this presents a bunch of issues. It's really hard to capture the singular perspective of a character and design an experience that resonates with it when you've also got the player running around doing whatever they want in ways that might not fit with the directorial vision of the developer. And so, for much of gaming's history, companies didn't really bother trying when it came to character-centric experiences. And when they did, all they could think to do to get us to see the world through a character's eyes was to force us through a gauntlet of cutscenes, which, if anything, just widened the gulf between our perspective as players and the character we were supposed to be controlling. Ever played a game where the feeling you got from the gameplay and the feeling you got from the main character's story were completely separate and barely had anything to do with each other? Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And so, this is why the default for player characters in games is usually that they're faceless ciphers with no perspective of their own, or literal avatars of us. By giving their main characters no inherent personality at all, developers were able to remove any potential conflict between the perspectives of an established character and the player controlling them. But it also meant that for a long time, games missed out on the great feeling that comes from letting a character's context infuse the gameplay. This is where the "it makes you feel like" confusion emerges. For decades, in basically all games, you or someone analogous to you was the main character, training us to see games through that lens. So, when developers finally got skilled and confident enough to create experiences where we're not the main character, and where we have fun vicariously through a fictional lens, we literally don't have the language to explain what's going on, or to fully appreciate the talent that goes into making these kinds of games, forcing us to fall back on language that we know is wrong, but that is the best we've got to describe what's happening. However, by understanding that sometimes we're not the main character, and that it's possible to perceive a game through someone else's eyes, developers are now able to not just open up a whole spectrum of new experiences for us, but to enhance and revitalize gameplay concepts that would otherwise feel pretty stale. A great example of this can be seen in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which, coincidentally, is the game that inspired this whole video. Basically, no individual idea in the game is particularly unique. In fact, I go so far as to call it downright derivative in places. But by framing its mechanics through Indiana Jones as a character, and by tweaking some balance, the game expertly recreates the frantic, scrappy fun of the movie's action scenes, and in so doing, adds some extra life into the tired old stealth action template. See, in the Great Circle, fighting more than one enemy at once is very tough, so you're pushed towards eliminating fascists quickly. Unfortunately, your gun is loud and doesn't hold that many bullets, and your fists aren't very reliable, encouraging you to use improvised melee weapons instead, which do a bunch of damage and are very funny to boot. However, improvised weapons tend to break after a few hits, meaning that every so often you'll calculate the number of hits wrong, or you'll get surprised by a dog, or not notice an extra soldier, and you'll suddenly end up without a weapon and your proverbial pants around your ankles, leading to these great improvisational comedy scraps where you're running around looking for a toilet brush or something to bash a German with before they aggro the whole camp, or you're forced to whip a guy in the face and then run away in a panic, expertly echoing the dirty fighting, escaping by the skin of his teeth fun of the real Indiana Jones. It's great. By making just a few adjustments to a standard template, suddenly these tired old systems don't just become incredible vehicles for characters, they elevate the game around them too, and the Great Circle is hardly alone here. Look at, like, The Witcher, for example. Basically nothing mechanical in these games lies outside the standard open-world action RPG template, but by refracting its components through the prism of Geralt, the main character, the Witcher series acquires an incredibly unique vibe that completely sets it apart. By making scouting, oiling your weapons, and planning your potion use part of the flow of gameplay, the games reflect that Geralt's not some random hero who runs in unprepared and just improvises, he's a professional, and that in order to succeed, players need to get on his level and view the world in the same detached, patient way that he, Geralt, does, which is his name. Equally, the Red Dead games are full of a bunch of different mechanics that serve literally no purpose but to give you ways to make Arthur Morgan do cool cowboy movie things because he's a cool, rugged outlaw ripped straight from spaghetti westerns. The ability to hogtie people, all the wilderness activities, and especially the Deadeye mode that lets you recreate western movie shootout moments all serve as ways to reward not just acting in a genre-savvy way, but to feed your gameplay into the story's central character questions about responsibility and honor, and to get you thinking about how the way John uses his skills reflects what kind of man he is. As an aside, It's also worth mentioning that many of these same tricks also apply to games where the characters aren't written in advance and we have to make our own. Mass Effect is such a pioneer of organic character writing in spite of its basic approach because it uses its moral choices not as a binary good-evil path selection, but as a way to encourage the player to roleplay consistently and to construct a coherent worldview for their Shepard. Even if 95% of people play Paragon, the fact that the Renegade options existed and that your Shepard chose not to do them makes your personal choices matter that much more. And this is a philosophy that's carried on into stuff like Baldur's Gate 3 and Disco Elysium. These games are full of little moments that bring up prior choices or give you some fun role-playing action to do, like intimidate things as a barbarian or slag off the moon goddess as a cleric of Shar, that remind you that you're not just playing as a puppet with a block of stats, you're playing as a fully fledged person with their own stake in the world. Special shout out goes to Disco Elysium skills, which literally shape the lens through which you as a player view the world, but I could and already have made a video about how cool that one is. The key success of these mechanical changes and gameplay loops isn't that they necessarily evoke any specific emotions or paint a particularly nuanced picture, but that they evoke the character in question in such a way that keeps them and their perspective front and center in our minds. And this is just as important for games with multiple player characters as it is in games with just one. One of the key successes of Overwatch, as loath as I am to praise that game, is how it matches its characters' personalities and designs to their toolset. Mercy diving in and resurrecting a whole team like a literal guardian angel, or Reinhardt stomping around with a big shield like a big cool knight, reflects both their intended gameplay role and the character's personality in a really evocative way. And if you want proof of how crucial this stuff is, look at literally any Concord character and try and tell me what their personality is or what they play like. It can't be done because they have no consistent character identity. These design tricks also apply to any number of party-based RPGs too. Susie, Deltarune's delinquent dinosaur deuteragonist, is narratively framed as being a violent wildcard, and so in battle she'll attack stuff wildly without any regard to your actual plans, even though she's still ostensibly on your side. This absolutely doesn't make you feel like her, but it does give you a much greater appreciation for her personality and her role in the story. Equally, in, say, Final Fantasy VII, nothing would change balance or story-wise if the developers made Barrett, the team's surrogate dad, into a fragile spellcaster, and made Aerith, the mysterious vulnerable weirdo people keep trying to kidnap, into a tank, but there would be much less of a through line between their personalities and how they play, making it that much more difficult to get immersed into their character, particularly when the game oscillates so frequently between battle and story. Yuffie, the team's designated comic relief, would be way less fun if that personality didn't also carry into her battle skills, which are all about tricks and dodges and bypassing enemy defenses, expertly showcasing her undiagnosed attention deficit disorder. Of course, effective utilization of character to amplify a game's best bits doesn't just come from the mechanical side of things. Thematics, which is to say how a game sounds, looks, and feels to play, can be just as important and can serve as a much more consistent tonal cue than purely systems design and balance related stuff. Obviously, the absolute star of the show here are the Batman games. From a nuts and bolts perspective, these titles don't do all that much different from your standard open-worldy game or 3D brawler. The difference lies in how every element of the game's style is laser focused on making Batman look as cool as possible. Not with the purpose of making us feel like Batman, but to give us the fun of watching his incredible skills in action and showcasing just how much pressure he's under, especially when one slip-up can mean instant death. Everything from the lighting to the way enemies react to you to the sweeping orchestral score serves to paint Batman as this brooding, dangerous hero with the world on his shoulders, and stuff like detective vision showing enemies pissing themselves because Batman's hunting them down isn't just an empowerment fantasy for the player, it's a showcase of Batman's status in Gotham organically woven into the gameplay, namely someone who's treated with as much if not more fear than the villains he hunts down. It's genius, and all the games that followed in the Arkham series footsteps ultimately used the same sort of tricks. By filling combat with slow-mo and lots of behind-the-scenes help like lock-on systems, the Shadow of War games showcased Talion's fearsome skill while requiring very little mastery from the player. Spiderman's powerful movement tools make swooping in to save the day like the friendly neighborhood arachnid you are as easy and as fun as possible, and the classic camera trick of never cutting away from the player character, often used by Sony games, makes it seem like the story is always revolving around you, even when it kind of isn't. These kinds of thematic cues are also important for character-centric games, where the person in question is light on autobiographical specifics to pull from. Something like Helldivers is absolutely a character-based game, even though you're playing as a nameless tool of fascism, and the game uses epic music, powerful feeling weapons, and appropriately monstrous baddies to let you indulge in the fun of playing as a brainwashed jingoistic piece of cannon fodder in a way that wouldn't work anywhere near as well if the game acknowledged that Super Earth were obviously the bad guys. On a similarly totalitarian note, Papers, Please wouldn't be nearly as effective if it didn't use some overbearing Soviet bleakness to not just set the scene for the kind of decisions you're going to make and the kind of stresses you're going to be under, but to make them matter at all. Papers, Please can't make you care about this anonymous invisible family, but it can convince you to play the role of someone who does, even if he doesn't have much in the way of a fixed character himself. Really, just like with mechanical characterization, a lot of the actual fun of thematic character work happens inside the player's head. It's the developer's job to set the emotional and thematic tone, and then to leave the rest to our imagination. This is why, say, Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro love stealing Kurosawa-style old-school samurai movie framing for their big fights. It's all to subconsciously get us in the mood for an epic one-on-one duel that we will then play out as we actually fight. It's also why GTA games put you up against really dumb cops, give everything ridiculous ragdoll or explosion effects, and fill their cities with an equal mix of glamour and sleaze. Because it wouldn't be anywhere near as fun to play as a cool asshole criminal in a more grounded setting where your cool crimes had a less visible effect. And it's not just wide, sweeping artistic flourishes that can achieve this either. Sometimes, even the inclusion of a single gameplay element or stylistic choice could be enough to remind us who we're playing as and to set the conceptual tone for the rest of the game. The deliberately extravagant and showboaty combat animations of Dante, Bayonetta, and Chai all serve to give us players an excuse to show off a bit. Agent 47's stupid one-liners and the silly weapons in Hitman are there to remind us that we are basically playing a pre-Daniel Craig James Bond game and that we should start leaning into the camp comedy. And Stray is filled with things to knock over, people to get in the way of, and comfortable things to nap on because you're playing as a cat, and those are, when you get down to it, basically the only three things cats do. I certainly can't think of any others. Unfortunately, the exact same mechanics and thematic touchstones that can serve to get us into sync with a character and playing in a way that reinforces their identity can also end up accidentally causing a rift between our perception of the game and the person we're supposed to be playing. Look at Halo, for example, a series I'm quite fond of that sees you playing as a walking tank of an 8-foot armoured super soldier who the game's cutscenes, visual language and writing go to great lengths to explain is an ultra-powerful one-man army, which is, you know, fine, except Master Chief doesn't really play like that, does he? In Halo, you actually often feel quite fragile, particularly on the harder difficulties, and skilled gameplay is much more about using cover, managing your shields, and using superior tactics to win fights. Stuff that is all perfectly fun from a gameplay point of view, but is totally at odds with the character lens the game presents you with. It's hard to buy that you're playing as a badass, unstoppable one-man army when most of the time you're taking potshots from cover or sniping grunts from a safe distance, especially compared to other titles that sell the same core character fantasy but synergize it with the mechanics much more effectively. In Doom or the Warhammer Space Marine games, you're given a bunch of tools, both explicit and hidden, that keep you in the fight long after it feels you should have died, giving this great impression of seeing your guys survive against the odds. And in stuff like Dynasty Warriors, Assassin's Creed or Robocop, the power and importance of the main character is showcased by basic enemies essentially posing zero threat to you at all and existing purely to get slaughtered en masse, making it that much easier to play like you're a total badass because the game rewards that perspective rather than punishing you by getting you killed. In fact, Halo's core combat mechanics are actually much more thematically resonant when applied to a character who's totally out of their depth against the Covenant, as we see in Halo ODST, where you don't play as Master Chief but as a rando soldier instead, and in that context, the gameplay rhythm of the series actually fits way better, even if there are relatively few changes from the main games. A similar disconnect between intended character lens and what the game ends up implying to us as a player can also be seen in the distinctly mediocre Callisto Protocol. Survival horror games live or die, quite literally, on the sense that we can feel vicarious fear through the main character. If they're too cool or too strong compared to the bad guys, then we don't get the fun of watching them struggle and be afraid of the monsters. And this is why all the genre's iconic mechanics, from ranged combat against melee enemies, to resource management, to risk-chasing efficiency, are all designed in such a way that they raise the tension you feel in a mechanical context to match the emotional tension of the main character. However, in the Callisto Protocol, not only is the main character surprisingly cool and collected, but he's also sort of a badass who is encouraged to fight zombies in melee, meaning that even though the game hits all the survival horror tropes, gross zombies, jump scares, etc., the player could never feel that engaged with them because their connection to the world just doesn't give a shit, and nothing about the gameplay gives you a reason to worry about what's lurking around the corner. Equally, this sense of broken connection is why the God of War puzzle reminders, where characters would immediately spoil how to solve certain puzzles, felt so jarring. It's not just insulting to your intelligence as a player, but also to Kratos' character, who's supposed to be experienced and competent to the point that there isn't much that can surprise him, only for the little twerp he was supposed to be protecting to turn around and do all the work for him, which is a complete reversal of their dynamic. Look, even the experts get this stuff wrong from time to time, what can I say? In case it wasn't obvious, video gaming's experiments with character-centric storytelling are very much in their infancy. For every game that's cracked the code and done it right, there are loads of titles out there that think all you need to tell a character-centric story is to put the camera over the shoulder and do lots of those walkie around talky bits. Or that believe if you simply tell the player that a character is cool in a cutscene enough times, they'll automatically feel cool to play. Even then, many of the games that do the best job of characterization still stumble from time to time too. The likes of Devil May Cry and Helldivers only work as character pieces if you can keep up with the pressures of the gameplay. And titles like Batman and Spiderman depend on importing an existing familiarity with their franchises in order to give them a head start, as well as the assumption that you're not sick of superheroes yet. But the more games work to pioneer new kinds of experiences, and we as gamers develop an ever more sophisticated understanding of how the medium works, the more different kinds of games we'll be able to play. And, to get back to the original topic of the video, that's the reason why I think we as players need to move beyond the kind of surface level thinking that informs those lazy, it makes you feel like observations. Not only is it often incorrect, but by failing to look at games on a deeper artistic level, we cheat ourselves out of more nuanced, more interesting experiences, and disincentivize developers experimenting with the structure of games as a medium. If we only ever think of player characters as existing to make us feel cool, or to justify shooting a bunch of non-specific bad guys, then we'll only ever be able to play games that go for these broad, primitive emotional stimuli, and we'll miss out on a bunch of cool stuff that can only be experienced through the eyes of a well-realized, well-communicated character. Until Rocksteady changed the game, basically all licensed titles were just the same generic on-rails action-adventure slop with a branded skin over them. But now, many of them are actually better than the recent output of their actual movies because the people making them have such an intimate understanding of the characters. And, as I've shown, a strong understanding of character can improve even the dumbest of action games as well. The new Doom series revitalized the whole genre and have a distinct feel that no other game has matched because of their embrace of Doom Guy as a character. Whereas the likes of, say, Shadow Warrior, another old school title that tried to reinvent itself along the same lines, feels drab and generic by comparison, despite having many of the same gameplay ideas. Taken purely on its objective gameplay merits, something like The Great Circle is shallow, easy, and filled with pointless distractions. But seen within the context of all that stuff existing as a toy box that lets you make your own Indiana Jones movie, complete with mysteries to solve, fun shenanigans to get into, and a deeper world to explore, it becomes so much more. All because it does such a good job of getting the player to appreciate their role not as the star actor, but as the director, of being behind the camera, but responsible for bringing the story to life. Now, if those talentless hacks George Lucas and Steven Spielberg would just get back to me about my idea for an Indiana Jones movie where he just goes around taking pictures of different cats, we might be able to save that dead franchise already. I mean, come on, how many years has Harrison Ford even got left in him? Pick up the phone, George, there's not much time! Hello, I am back for 2025, and my god, is it February already? What the hell? That's what I get for taking a holiday after the new year, I guess. Whoops. Anyway, welcome to this, the After the Video segment, that part of every single video where I talk about some cool internet things that you need to be made aware of. Now, usually I like to take this time to shout out someone else on the internet that's doing something interesting, but I thought I'd break with tradition just this once to shout out myself in a disgusting act of pure ego. Yes, that's right, it's me, or more specifically, the new YouTube memberships that should, assuming I've done everything correctly, be available on my channel right now. Whoa! I've heard a lot of people saying that they love a way to support the channel that isn't on Patreon, and so I thought I'd give them exactly what they want in the form of a YouTube membership. There's only one tier right now because I'm still figuring out how it all works, but it is equivalent to the $5 Patreon tier in virtually every way. You get earlier access to videos, behind the scenes content, an occasional update video where I ramble about stuff going on with the channel, and also your name in the credits, somewhere in this general direction. You asked for it, so I'm delivering it, a few years after YouTube announced this feature. By the way, if you're a patron, nothing's going to change, and just between you and me, I think it's a bit better of a deal over on Patreon because you also get the complete back catalogue of everything I've ever posted, and also I get a much bigger cut of the money over there. But if you're looking for a more convenient way to give me cash that doesn't involve going to a different website, then here it is. I am seriously so grateful to everyone's support over the last few years. Every penny that's come my way has been hugely appreciated, and I want nothing more than to give you all the best possible return on investment to show you just how thankful I am for the continued help, doing what I must stress is literally my dream job. Of course, this wouldn't be the After the Video segment without one special thing that is unfortunately going to be restricted to patrons only for the time being because it's long enough already, and that's the part where I read out a list of all my top tier mysterious benefactors. They're the cream of the crop, the best of the best, my elite honor guard you have to fight before you get to challenge me, and they are Ali Wright, Andrew Labrano, Anno94, Bobby, Bodybuilding Baboon Baba Bob, Brian Natariani, Constantine Amend, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digleteer, Dis Ellie, Ekton, Ektunder, Edward Franklin Woods, Edwina the Space Bun, Eric Woolston, Eugene Bulkin, Fulibaxi, Furious Hulk, Gazcol, Grandpa Mocker, Heck It's Noah, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jinkaloid, Kevin Help Us, Konolov, Kangi, Luke Kokoran, Mace Window 54, Maxim Filipov, Marika Vladilina Altair, Mark Vallant, May Contain Fox-Like Substance, Mika Oi, Michael C., Mike Oxlong, Nate Graff, Oliver Marhofer, Patrick Bromberg, Peter Tomasic, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Silver Forfey, Steamrollerman, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brandmeier, and ciao. Okay, thanks for watching. Here's to slightly more regular uploads going forwards. We'll see if I can stick to that. Bye!